I was very severely anxiously attached. Love felt really, really hard. It was like a minefield all the time.
Like there's something wrong with you. Other people are doing it and it must be your own fault.
I was just getting that constantly reflected back to me because whether you realize it or not, it's subconscious. You are subconsciously attracting the same person over and over again, pulling away. It's like the biggest thing that anxious attachment struggle with because it's their deepest fear of abandonment.
And the other side for the avoidant is massive amount of rumination. What's wrong with me? Am I ever going to find love? I often say that deep down, most humans, we have very similar fears.
One runs away from it, one runs towards it. That's it.
Yeah.
Really, these are identities that are just formed that have subconscious beliefs underneath them. If you reprogram those beliefs and you reprogram the nervous system to feel safe, you can retrain your version of love.
We are so disconnected from one another and what's really happening with the other person. And I just want to create an opportunity to be like, oh yeah, that's how it is for them. And this is how it is for us, for example. How do anxious people experience setting their own boundaries and receiving boundaries from a partner?
Okay, so
welcome back, listeners. Welcome back to another episode of the Authentic Man podcast. Today I have with me a wonderful woman, a woman who does some incredible work with women, moving out of that state of anxious attachment, right? That can really plague us when it comes to relationship. I work with some men who are in this and it can really cause havoc. And I thought you'd be a perfect guest to get on to talk about the two sides, because I think something we do so often when we are anxious or avoidant, we do a lot of projection against the other side. And also actually even saying that, I'm speaking to it in the way that I hear often is it's like we're in war together, when actually it's two human beings who are actually trying to come together and create love, even though they have wounds and pain and trauma to get through. Hello, Candice. How are you doing today?
hello, thank you for having me. I'm excited. I'm good, thank you.
I thought I'd just dive right in for a question, actually. Before you did your work, your personal work, your healing work, what did love feel like for you?
Oh, that is a big question. So, as most people, when they come to this work, which I'm sure yours is probably similar, is that you've personally experienced this. So I was very anxiously attached, very severely anxiously attached, and love felt really hard, like really, really hard. Like I could see everyone around me seemed to just, roll into relationships, roll into commitments so easily, and they didn't have to overanalyze everything. They didn't have to overthink everything. It was just so much more simpler. But for me, it was like a minefield all the time, and I was always anxious, even when I had no idea what even an anxious attachment style was. And it just felt like I was always the one in unhealthy, toxic kind of like experiences, relationships.
Yeah. And it can feel really chaotic and confusing, and like, I imagine it feels those ways. And also you start to believe that like relationships just can't work for you. Like there's something wrong with you. Other people are doing it and something's not working for you, and it must be your own fault.
Yeah, absolutely. And, for me, I had a really traumatic childhood. So I didn't see healthy love, and I didn't even experience good, healthy, safe love myself, even as a child. So I knew that for me, my experiences might be more harder because I didn't even have a baseline to begin with. So yeah, I definitely already had beliefs that like I was the problem, I was broken, I was too much, all of those things. I had them from my childhood, let alone then going into relationships where I was just getting that constantly reflected back to me as confirmation.
It's so interesting you say about, the childhood, and like often people, they don't link the two things. They don't link like romantic relationships and the struggle in romantic relationships and the childhood that we experience. Because, I work for a lot of guys, and they like to say to me, they come to me and they're like, relationships aren't working. This is the reason. I need to just solve this. And it's usually like, I don't communicate very well. I need to solve that. And I'm like, tell me about your parents. And they're like, that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. My parents don't matter. They're not here. I barely speak to them. They're fine. They're good. we often like to brush it under the carpet as if it doesn't have any impact on us.
Yeah, and that is actually my favorite thing to do. I am great at hearing people's experiences and then figuring out, oh, okay, this is like probably what has, created that belief for you or created you to protect yourself. And the thing is, once you realize that and that it is coming from childhood, initially, and your relationships are just confirming that, then it makes it a lot easier to dismantle it and work with it once you realize the root. And I know I had no idea that there was a connection either. And I don't know if you use this work, but I use inner child healing. It was one of my big tools that I used when I was anxious. I was in a relationship with what appeared to be an avoidant. I was experiencing a lot of avoidance in the relationship, and I was just like triggered to the point that it was like I wasn't a grown woman anymore. I was like this little girl that was having these tantrums or acting out in this way because I was so fearful, and it was coming from my childhood. It was coming from my dad abandoning me, for instance. There is so much more to it than that people don't realize. And one thing I just want to say, in the introduction you said that I work with women. I actually work with women and men, because attachment styles do not they're gender neutral. Women can be avoidant, men can be anxious, as much as there seems to be a thing around it that makes people think not, but it can be. Yeah.
Yeah. Is it something that I think is really interesting, is that the way that we relate to men and women in society and the way we talk about them is we talk as if all women are anxious and all men are avoidant, right? And I find this really fascinating because when we talk about dating and relationships, this is usually the standpoint that people talk about, even inside of polarity circles and so forth. It still kind of sits in this kind of old structure of like men are avoidant, women are anxious, and it really erases the kind of flip of that. The anxious man, for instance, or the avoidant woman, their experience is kind of erased from the conversation, as if they don't matter, when things are actually a lot more balanced than most people kind of assume.
Yeah, absolutely. Or as I would say it, maybe women are crazy is a term that people will see as an anxious woman, or a man is non-committal, or like just, a bachelor or whatever it is. Those are the stereotypes that we're given, but it's so much deeper than that. It's really born from trauma. It's imprints that are imprinted onto us that create our attachment and our relationship when it comes to love for ourselves and love for other people.
Yeah. And we have no idea. We all go out into dating, and, everyone's dating at this moment, online dating, whatever way they're dating, and they're carrying all this stuff, and they're thinking, this isn't me, this is that person I just met. Or all the guys I come to sometimes, they're like, no, like I just need to meet the right woman. And when I meet the right woman, everything's going to be fine. So I'm going to keep dating and everything's going to be okay. Because when I meet the right woman, I'm not going to have this drama. She's not going to get upset about me disappearing for days on end, or she's not going to get upset about me not speaking about how I feel. She'll just accept me as I am. That's something I hear reasonably often.
I love that. Yeah, absolutely. And, you're not going to do that. Anyone listening and thinking that that's going to happen, you're going to meet the same person in a different body, because whether you realize it or not, it's subconscious. You are subconsciously attracting the same person over and over again. So, yeah, doing the work is the only way.
I had this experience in my life where, and I guess it's when I started to realize to take some responsibility, because for years I was like, all women are crazy. As you said, that was my thing. All women are crazy. And then all the guys, are like, yeah, man, women are crazy. Why are they so crazy for? I remember sitting with friends, smoking joints and talking about how crazy women were. We used to spend many hours doing it. And it probably took me many years until I got into kind of my early 30s. And I started to like look and go, wait a minute here. Like, it's my behavior. When I do these things happen. And I started to look and go, okay, it's not about these women. And I think one of the moments really came was I realized, I was like, all the women I meet, they have like a 50, 60% resemblance to my mum. Not necessarily in looks, but in their temperament. always very nurturing, very caring, very thoughtful, overgiving, self-sacrificing, all those sorts of traits. And some of those traits, you know, really lovely. It's lovely to have a woman who's nurturing and caring and so forth. But I would also simultaneously find myself being really frustrated with other aspects of them, like their adversity to risk, low self-confidence and low self-esteem sometimes, and needing me to lead them somewhere in some direction. And I think it was a light bulb moment. And I was like, wait a minute, I keep dating my mum. Why do I keep dating my mum? This is a bit of a problem here.
I love that. I love that. So what did you do with that information?
What did I do with that information? I started to look at why was it that I was attracted to these women? What was it about these women I was attracted to? And then obviously we engage the cognitive brain, right? And the problem with the cognitive brain is we'll take something and then we'll rationalize it, right? So we rationalize like, oh, the reason I was attracted to this woman is because she was beautiful, she was interesting, you know, we had fun, we laughed, we had good sex. And what I'm probably negating is some unconscious stuff. I'd really started to look at kind of the unconscious mind, but not necessarily from the perspective of relationships. And then I started to really see like, okay, when you start to really see that these unconscious ways of being, and as a Margot call it, the unfinished business, you know, the unfinished business. I always wish my mum was maybe more entrepreneurial, a bit more go-getting and so forth. So I kept finding myself in positions where I could inspire or I wouldn't say push the women I was with to be more entrepreneurial, to push themselves, to believe in themselves and so forth. That was a dynamic I found myself in. I would love to know what was your personal common dynamic you found yourself in relationships.
So actually what you just said was so interesting, because I've never heard somebody termed an avoidant say, you know, I was pushing them, because, you know, as an anxious attachment style, there's something that I label as a fixer identity. I was very much a fixer identity. It came from the belief that if they need me, then they won't leave me. And so I was very much the one pushing them and, you know, trying to get them to see their own potential and trying to, you know, fix them, solve them, caretake them, anything I could. So it's interesting that you said that you experienced that too. And actually, I don't think anxious and avoidant are that different. It's just that their protective dynamics are different. So for me, I found myself constantly trying to fix people, constantly in relationships where I was always the support. I was always the one trying to bring them along and like, you know, that kind of thing. And then I also found myself very much with people that just closeness, you know, felt engulfing for them, and intimacy was, you know, they appeared avoidant. And of course that just triggered my anxiety, my anxious attachment style to want more of it. And that is where we start to chase. And that's where the avoidant will start to pull away more, because they, you know, have the beliefs around closeness will be a problem for me, or lose my freedom and those kind of things. So it's often like the opposite that is happening there. So those were the kind of dynamics that I found myself in all the time, and I couldn't understand. It was the same thing playing out. I wouldn't say that it was one parent like you, but I definitely found my whole childhood dynamics, which were not healthy, I saw them in every relationship play out in different ways. So it was definitely subconsciously I was looking for that in people.
A question for you, actually, off the back of that, something that I have debated with other coaches before. What would you say do you think is harder for people to heal? Anxious attachment or avoidant attachment?
So if you'd have asked me earlier in my career in this, in helping people, I would have said avoidant is harder, because that is what, you know, seems to be, and actually fearful avoidant, to be specific. But actually what I have realized now as I've evolved and my work has evolved is that really these are identities that are just formed, that have subconscious beliefs underneath them. Anxious attachment style has beliefs, avoidant have beliefs. Some of them are very similar. And actually, if you reprogram those beliefs and you reprogram the nervous system to feel safe in these situations, actually they're the same. You can totally retrain your version of love by doing that if you work with the subconscious and the nervous system at the same time. So I don't think any is harder, just slightly different approach and what you're programming.
Quite a radical view, you know, from the world of Instagram and the truth that gets thrown around on reels. You would definitely believe that, you know, the avoidants they have no hope, and they will never see the light of change and evolution and growth and experience the love that they deep down really desire.
Yeah. And, you know, I've always been someone that has spoken out about those things, because I don't think it's healthy to blame a person or take, you know, it's a lot easier to just say they did that to me. And I know when you have an anxious attachment style, I absolutely did that too. It was all the avoidance fault, right? But what I have learned to do is realize, actually, what are they reflecting in me? And if you look at it from that perspective, sorry, then you can see, actually, it's me that has to change for the reflection, for the outcome to change. And that is exactly what happens. And that does take rapid responsibility. It does stop you from just assuming they're the problem. And it just allows you to actually empower yourself to do the change that will change it, rather than being a victim of circumstance, of somebody else doing something to you. That's what changed everything for me.
Yeah. I see the same thing for myself, and also the men I work with, is they, like I said before, they believe if they just find a sane woman, a woman that's not crazy, not too emotional is often the second one I hear, then everything will be fine. And like you said, it's like our relational experiences are just a reflection of deeper experiences occurring within us. You know, if you keep attracting chaos, then there's something chaotic in you. Or if you keep attracting emotionally unavailable partners, there's part of you that you're emotionally unavailable to, that you don't want to go near, that you don't want to touch, and you're just being reflected back to you by the people that you're meeting in the relational world.
Yeah, absolutely. So for instance, an avoidant might believe, this is one that I have heard is common, is around closeness or intimacy, you know, it will cost them freedom, for instance. So subconsciously, if they have that belief, they will experience people who move really fast emotionally. You know, they will engulf them a little bit, like an anxious attachment style. They will experience people that need constant reassurance, for instance. It's you know, or people that need real high levels of like emotional intimacy. There are so many different outcomes that you will attract when you have that kind of belief. And until you change that belief, you will keep attracting the same partners. You will keep being in relationships where you feel pressured and you have to withdraw to be able to not feel smothered, or you'll be with partners that like will chase you harder when you do that or escalate. And actually subconsciously, because you believe intimacy equals loss for you, you will unconsciously choose partners who will make intimacy feel so intense, and it will just justify the belief that I need distance because closeness and intimacy is not safe for me. And it's the same kind of thing that is just playing out in your relationships. Of course, an anxious has an opposite version of that.
Yeah. And then you add in the fact that our thoughts, our beliefs create our thoughts, and our thoughts create our actions and our responses, and even to some degree our reactions and expectations of people and our projections. So we go, and I'm going to talk from the avoidant man's perspective. You go into a relationship or you start dating someone and things start to move fast. And I often have to say to my clients, are things actually moving fast? Or that you assume that because you have started seeing someone that it's actually moving quickly. You've started to tell yourself it's moving quickly. You spotted all the signs of things moving quickly. They told you about certain bits of information, certain things happened, blah, blah, blah. You start to tell yourself it's moving fast. You start to feel anxious, because avoidant people feel very, very anxious. They're just very good at hiding all of those feelings and emotions. So then you start to experience the relationship as being really intense. You want to pull away because you don't like the intensity, because the emotional capacity is low and it's difficult to be in that intensity. And you pull away, and then the question I'm often saying is like, well, is that really what happened? Is it really that the things were moving quickly? Is it really that they were kind of fast tracking the relationship? Or was it that you just expected this is how it's going to turn out? So you started to responding to your expectation. You started to project what your mind was telling you, what your beliefs were telling you, what your nervous system was telling you onto the person in front of you, instead of actually kind of testing the truth of reality.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing that makes that harder to do, and I always say when people, it's the same experience for anxious attachment style and avoidance. You know, in the beginning, they're both rushing the relationship. They're both loving the feels of it and it's feeling great for them, until suddenly their attachment style, their nervous system gets activated. And then suddenly the anxious fears abandonment and the avoidant fears intimacy. So that gets activated, and that's your nervous system, which is why is so important. You know, that trauma lives in your body. So sometimes it's not as easy to just be like, and I'm sure you know this, is like, just like an anxious person, I'm not going to get triggered by that, I'm not going to chase them. It doesn't work, because your whole body is anxious. As well as an avoidant, it's the same thing, which is why you have to work with the subconscious and you have to work with the body to feel more neutral in those circumstances. And then your mind will take that as actually there's no threat, like what you're saying. It's just the perspective of a threat, and your body has a lot of evidence of that, because it starts as early as childhood, and everything else has just been confirmation of that since.
And the piece there about threat, you say, is so true, isn't it? We you know, I'm often pulled back to, you know, when I talk to friends or clients even, and they're talking about relationships, and they're just like, for instance, I'm talking to someone who is working with someone who's anxious, and they'll just go to me, why doesn't my partner just reassure me? Like, it's so easy to say those words. And I'm like, I understand logically and cognitively that seems very simple to you. And it is very simple. But what you're missing is this deep feeling within them that lives even below the beliefs, that this sense to them that their life is in danger if they provide this reassurance, that their whole being is in danger and there's a threat to their survival. And they don't know the feelings there. They just feel that something feels scary about doing something that feels, when you know, very logically, it feels so simple, but there's far more deeper layers to it. Like you say, it's like really housed in the nervous system, was baked in it through our childhood and early years.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I don't always think, and I don't subscribe to necessarily the outcome is that your partner has to reassure you 24/7, because that is not going to help you either, and that's not a secure relationship. You know, personally, I've been in, even now as a secure person, I've been in examples where I've had to give reassurance all the time, and it's really off-putting. It's not great. So, you know, you don't want to be in that place, and it's not very empowering for an anxious person that is constantly needing that reassurance. And, you know, no amount of reassurance is ever going to be good enough at the end of the day. So it is always important to do that work and find that validation and that reassurance within yourself, so you can have a balance. Of course, you want your partner to reassure you and to love you, but anything you're chasing, you're going to find is actually you're going to get the opposite. They're not going to reassure you when you're asking for it and needing it. You're going to get them being resistant to it, like how an avoidant would respond to it. So yeah, it is a threat, but you want to neutralize the threat, not put that pressure on your relationship, because ultimately it's not going to be the healthiest dynamic for any of you.
So it creates a dynamic where it's like, well, I'm feeling this threat experience, and my partner's the only person that can do anything about it. And actually, as I say that, like, that becomes, use the phrase empowering, it becomes really disempowering to a partner, because we're like, oh, you're the only person that you can fix me. So I need to always come to you for you to do something to neutralize this internal experience I'm having, as feeling threat, of feeling like there's something wrong, that, you know, I'm going to be hurt in some way.
Yeah, and in that process, you're literally self-abandoning, which is only going to make you more anxious. You are outsourcing that to other people, and that is what we learn as an anxious attachment style, to outsource our safety. No judgment, absolutely done it, been there, got the t-shirt, but that is the wrong thing to do. It's not going to give you the healthy dynamic that you want. It's not about blaming them. It's about, this is not going to be good for you. So actually it's about taking that responsibility, finding that inner safety within yourself, in that inner validation, that security within yourself, so that your dynamic can be more healthy and you're not outsourcing that power. You know, you're not giving that to anyone else and abandoning yourself at the same point to get it, because it's only going to make you more anxious.
And the truth is, it's not so different for avoidance, is that they struggle with this self-trust and clarity. I see constantly of like knowing, like, is this, the constant avoidant question is like, is this relationship right for me? Is it not? That's the constant experience that I speak to people like, I've met someone, they're amazing. I'm not sure if it's right. I've seen this. I'm not sure. Just like a real lack of internal safety with love, right? Safety with connection. And actually it's a very similar process of like, oh, actually, what does it feel like to feel safe on your own and safe with somebody else, and actually growing the emotional capacity to be with the ebbs and flows of relationship while also expressing love, while also being in connection with someone, even when it gets difficult. But it is so much of the internal problems that we have come from this kind of lack of safety, lack of sense of self, lack of self-trust in our own decisions, choices, and impulses.
I absolutely love that you say that. And it's so interesting hearing this conversation, because actually it's like almost identical to anxious attachment style, because they absolutely don't trust themselves as well. But it's just a different way, it might show up in different, with an anxious attachment style, they might, hyper focus when they don't trust themselves. They might hyper focus on something and they might seek reassurance or try to get closer or overexpress themselves, for instance. Whereas an avoidant might not trust themselves, or they might not, they might have the feelings, but they will pull away instead, or they will create space. They will, do something different. So it's actually the same thing. It's just showing up in a different way.
Yeah. I often say that deep down, most humans, we have very similar fears. We just respond to those fears differently. It's that fear of, I don't believe I'm lovable. Deep down is what a lot of us worry about. I'm not lovable. And what I see with avoidance is they don't believe they're lovable. So they're like, well, if I'm not, and this is what's true, I'm just going to stay away from it. I'm just going to back away from it because this is going to be proved right. So I'm going to back away from it. And what I see with my anxious clients is they believe they're not lovable and they're doing their damnedest to prove that it's not true.
Yeah. One runs away from it, one runs towards it. That's it.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah. Same thing. Different bodies, different people. I thought we'd jump into a little segment here, actually, I was talking about before, to talk about the two sides of various situations that come up. Because, as I've said many times, and I'll continue to say, we often stand on we stand on two sides of a valley, right? You could put men one side, women the one side, you could put anxious people one side, avoidant people one side. And we are so disconnected from one another and what's really happening with the other person that we don't have any curiosity, we don't have any compassion. And we don't necessarily think outside of our own experience, right? And the pain of our experience, which is a very human thing to do. But actually, so many of these situations that occur, the two people are having these different experiences, worries, fears, anxieties. And I just want to create an opportunity to be like, oh yeah, that's how it is for them. And this is how it is for us, for example. So I'm going to throw out a couple of things and I'm going to, get you to ask you to tell me like, what's the experience? What's the fears? What are anxious people feeling when this happens? The first one I've got here is anxious person meets someone ideal. But the person isn't interested in a relationship. They don't want to be with them, right? It might be that they don't want anything serious, or they just don't see a future or feel a spark, for example.
So an anxious person will likely see that as an opportunity to work harder and maybe stay a little bit longer to see whether they can make them change their mind, whether they can fix them. It depends, what they could be. They might have, the belief they have to be perfect to be loved. So they might perform for that person. They might try and be everything that person needs to try and prove, like what you said, that they are lovable, they are chosen, that person will choose them, which is often why people end up settling for situationships or staying in things that actually is not what they want. But they have such a fear of abandonment that they fear that if they walk away or if they lose this person, then they're not going to get anything better, or they're going to lose this opportunity. So it keeps them in a really difficult position. I've had loads of clients that are in situationships and then they're so afraid to walk away because they're feeling that anxiety, and if I can just keep going, if I can just hold on a little bit more or do this a bit more, then, and because they're so hypervigilant, they're looking at the text messages the person sent them or whatever it is, the words they said, but they do, they're holding on to absolutely everything as confirmation to like, no, I should keep going because I'm scared if I don't. So that is what's happening there.
Yeah. And this dynamic for avoidance, right, happens a lot more than people think, where they meet someone, they think they're ideal and the person's not interested. They don't want a relationship or they don't see a future. And what occurs for the avoidant is massive amount of rumination. What's wrong with me? Am I ever going to find love? And then there's a frustration and an anger often, which is like, I should give up. I shouldn't bother with this. I can't bother with dating. I shouldn't do relationships anymore. This isn't going to work out. And then there's a start to look at themselves. And this is where the inner critic starts to become really active for avoidant people. And they start to critique themselves and what's wrong with them and where they think they went wrong and so forth. But actually they do all this from a distance because they hear the I'm not interested and they just go, okay, fine. So all of this is happening at a distance away where they're not making any effort to contact. There might be the odd stray message of like, hey, how you doing? Some little tentative ways to try and reassert connection, but it's not as common. Sometimes drunkenly it will happen. That's probably one of the most common times people are drunk and avoidants are drunk and they're like, oh, you didn't want me. And maybe some emotion comes out because their inhibitions are low. But there's a lot of questioning of self, that the belief that a lot of avoidants, especially men, have is like, I'm not good enough. There's something wrong with me. That starts to go into overdrive and the inner critic goes into overdrive about them. And this can spiral even into depression. I've seen in a number of men. Or it can be things like numbing, substance abuse, overworking. But there's usually an attempt to remove themselves from the intensive feelings that they're having because the feelings are overwhelming for them.
Wow. Yeah, that totally makes sense. And it's interesting because they won't show that, whereas just an anxious attachment style might just show it a bit more. They might act out or they might not, but they're still experiencing that outwardly, and avoidance experience it more inwardly.
Yeah, exactly. Great. Next scenario is pulling back from intimacy.
Oh, this one is so painful.
The classic, eh?
As well. Oh my God. If, most of my content that does really well is around pulling away. It's like the biggest thing that anxious attachment struggle with because it's their deepest fear of abandonment. Now, suddenly this person has not wanting them, or they're lost interest, or they're just, different, and it will just kick in their nervous system. They'll be feeling high levels of anxiety, like to the point that they won't be able to focus on anything else. They will be so hyper focused on this person. They will be constantly thinking about it, waiting for their message. All of these things will be happening because it's just feeding into the fear that, people leave me and love doesn't stay for me, and that, I'm too much for people and they lose interest. They walk away. So it's probably like the most painful thing for people to sit with, especially when their nervous system is so active. And the story that they'll be saying is their mind, like you said, their inner critic, the mind will be overthinking everything, looking for every detail of like, what did they do wrong? Was it something they said? Was it something they did? Like they'll be picking themselves apart because of it.
Yeah. For the avoidant person, it's incredible amounts of like a system overload. They experience this. So, the intimacy happens. Sometimes it's really beautiful sex, or there's a closeness, or there's an experience or something like that. And then they do the pulling away because there's an overwhelm, there's a fear, there's an engulfment of, and a lot of this experience happens in the head, not actually really in reality. And the story starts to be is like, oh my God, if I get close, loss, the fear of loss, I'm going to lose my freedom. There's going to be all this obligation and expectation. Things are going too quickly. And then there starts to be this kind of future projection that occurs. Like, okay, if things continue like this, then before I know it, we're going to be I once saw it to a guy, he literally put it this way: before I know it, we're going to be boyfriend and girlfriend, and then we're going to be engaged, and then we're going to be married, and we have kids, and then my life is over. You know, it's that quick collapse in their heads of like losing what they prize. But it's actually, I think when we say losing freedom as a prize for avoidance, is actually we're downplaying like independence for avoidant people is their safety. Like they can go back to themselves and they can get away from chaos and difficulty by being alone. So it's this real intense experience of feelings of wanting to get away, all these potential fears of the future. And then there's also the realization that they've pulled away when they're a bit more aware. And then there's a guilt and shame about what they've done, because they're like, oh my God, I did this. This is with the more aware ones. There's a guilt and shame about what they've done and how it might have hurt the other person. And then there's kind of this experience of being paralyzed. Like, okay, I don't want to move further away because that's going to make it worse. I don't want to move closer because I'm going to give them the wrong idea, impression, especially if I'm not sure where this is going. So there's this kind of paralyzedness, and you'll see this where this, I think, comes in where there's like this hot and cold can start to appear, where they're like messaging and seem okay, and then they disappear again because there's this lack of clarity and sense of sureness about how they want to move forward.
Yeah, and meanwhile, the anxious attachment style has planned the wedding and has got all the the focus. You know, what the avoidant is worried about, the anxious attachment in their mind has already thought about the fantasy of all of those things. So it is funny, but actually what's funny is, and a lot of people don't think an anxious attachment style is afraid of commitment or afraid of vulnerability and intimacy, but actually that triggers their anxiety more than people even realize. And it's just the fear might be a little bit different, but it's still there. It will still trigger your anxiety too. Intimacy will do that for sure.
Yeah, I like this game. Commitment.
Okay.
Commitment.
What's the scenario of commitment?
The scenario is things are getting closer and they've become committed in some sort of way, where we call it, let's call it exclusive commitment. They become boyfriend and girlfriend, for example.
So I think a lot of people, anxious attachment style, will think that will give them security, having that commitment, but actually it can very much activate their anxious attachment style, and they can sabotage relationships subconsciously without realizing it when they get that kind of confirmation, or even when somebody is so choosing them. Somebody, like, actually, when you haven't experienced that and somebody wants to commit to you and choose you and everything's great, it can be even harder for you as an anxious attachment style, because you're always waiting for like the other shoe to drop. You're always waiting for something to happen. So yes, in hindsight, we think we want commitment, we chase commitment, but actually it's not actually the safety that is going to give us, and we're going to end up being anxious just as much from that as well. You know, it's not going to end the anxiety once you get it. So yeah, it kind of depends on the person, but that's how they'll see it. They'll think they want it, but it will activate them at the same time.
It's almost like there's a fear of loss. I now have it's a bit like a Gollum. Gollum has the precious, and it's like, I need to keep the precious. How do I keep the precious? I need to, be frantically trying to keep it.
That's exactly it, because they cling hold of it, which is what an avoidant feels energetically. So even though they've chased, they've done all the hard work to get this thing, now they have to keep it. And so it's and they have to do that with their nervous system constantly being triggered. It's not an easy thing to navigate with that.
Yeah. The other side, commitment, usually the commitment happens and then there becomes a second guessing. Is this the right relationship for me? Is this the right person? Am I ready for this? And there's this doubt, waves and waves of doubt. Am I doing the right thing? Is this the right person? And then there's a fault finding that starts to kick in. Like, what's wrong? Oh, they did this. Maybe that means they're not right for me. Searching for signs of something not being right. That's definitely something that starts to creep in. And then what often happens then is this, what I call kind of sitting on the fence. They sit on the fence of the relationship. So they'll sit on the fence of the relationship, observing, looking for signs of its rightness and wrongness. We're waiting for signs from God to go, okay, is this something I should properly commit to completely, or is it something I should leave? which creates this hot and cold, but also more than anything, it creates this observer effect. Instead of being an active participant in a relationship and engaged in it, they become an observer waiting for evidence, almost like a courtroom. They're just observing and waiting, observing and waiting. So they're felt as not really being committed. So though they've chosen the commitment, often as an avoidant person, they are experiencing themselves as not being fully committed. And I caveat this with, this isn't obviously all avoidant people. Sometimes we get into a relationship and we're committed and we're really in and it works, you know. But a very common thing that I'm speaking to men about often is like they get into the relationship and then it could be a month, it could be 6 months. And then there's the cycle of fault finding, seeing what's wrong, struggling with the emotional intensity they experience around the relating process and deepening and so forth.
Yeah, that explains a relationship I had very well. And how it felt. But one thing I would say is that an anxious person definitely does question whether the relationship is right for them too. They do. But their fear of abandonment, fear of loss, fear of walking away is so much louder that even if they know something is not right for them, and that's why they can sometimes accept behavior that is not, you know, great for them, they will stay because of that fear is so much louder than them questioning. Whereas obviously an avoidant will walk away instead. Yeah.
Or they walk away. And I guess maybe this feeds into the second one, which is the breakup. You know, when one person breaks up with the other, the breakup happens. I'll start on this one actually. The breakup happens and usually the avoidant feels relief. It's the most common feeling that I speak to men and I have experienced in my life after a breakup. And usually the first feeling is relief, like a weight off their shoulders of the stress and the worry, the self-doubt, the emotions, the turmoil and so forth is gone. And they feel this relief and there's like a joy and they feel, you can almost imagine them frolicking in the lavender fields. They feel so happy. And then, and then comes the period of reality kicks in a bit because they've been living in their heads. They've been living in the belief that if I don't have this relationship, my life is going to be infinitely better. And then they, you know, the thing that as humans we do a lot, we lose something and we're like, oh, cool, that's fine. And then once we've lost it, we realize all the good things that we didn't have. And then becomes this another process of self-doubt, of self-questioning, this rumination of like, oh my God, maybe I just lost a really good relationship. What should I do? I've destroyed it again. Oh my God. There's a lot of this rumination with themselves where they actually have seen many men who like struggle to work, struggle to go to the gym because they've just been consumed by the rumination, looking at old photos of them and their partner, like looking back at text messages, all this kind of thing, and this quietly to themselves. And then what they do is they're like, okay, I need to reach out in some way. And this is when you usually get that stray random message of like, hey, how you doing? Or, hey, I saw this thing and it reminded me of you, if they're really, you know, willing to be open. Or it could be a late night call, but there's this desire to reach out and rekindle and reconnect.
But let me ask you before I answer from an anxious perspective, they don't always reach out and reconnect though, do they?
No, not always. Not necessarily in obvious ways. There's times where they just like, okay, because sometimes this timeline of thinking it's the wrong decision can pan into their next relationship. It's not uncommon for, especially the men that I've worked with and I've spoken to, for them to end a relationship, be like, great, not good relationship. They usually dive straight back into dating. Very rarely. I have to kind of enforce what I call a feminine cleanse on men often of like, you're going to take 3 months and do no dating, no chasing women and nothing. They find that very difficult. And then they'll go into another relationship and that relationship could be another year down the line. And then suddenly there's a comparison and there's a regret. And they're like, oh, this relationship I'm in now isn't great. Maybe my ex-partner was way better for me. Right. And sometimes they never reach out because they're like, I can't reach out because they've met somebody else or it's unreasonable. But I find often if they know their ex is still single and they believe there's some glimmer of hope that things could be rekindled, they often will reach out in some capacity, and it might not even look like they're reaching out. It could be start following on Instagram again, start looking at your stories. They'll do these tiny little movements in the hope that you'll see it and then you'll take the action. For not all of them, but that kind of way of putting the ball into your court can happen.
So for an anxious attachment style, when a breakup happens, I think it really depends on the relationship, in the sense of, if it's been like more of a short kind of intense thing, and then the person, you know, ghosts them or doesn't want to be with them anymore or whatever it is, I think that can leave the person, like, it's their worst fear. Like this person has gone, this person has disappeared, their abandonment wound is so triggered. But I know that there were times, like for me, actually, when I would break up, I had been in relationships for so long. I had been so anxious for so long. I had done it all to the point of like never letting go, that actually by the time it broke up, I just felt relieved myself. And I felt like, oh my God, I was finally free, and I was able to rise up because I was no longer so anxious, so overthinking about this person, consumed, and, you know, just feeling like I couldn't leave something that was really hurting me constantly. But I think it takes you a really long time to get to that point when you're an anxious attachment style. So I think it does depend on what stage you're at, because an anxious attachment style does not like to give up. So they will go through all of the stages before breakup, basically. So it really just depends on where you're at and how much you're willing to tolerate at that point, as to how they will see it too.
Yeah. I've through speaking to my clients, you know, some of the anxious ones, when you realize like how far and how much they're willing to try to make a relationship work. Like we're talking, I've spoke to people where they're like, I think I knew after 2 years the relationship wasn't good, and we stayed together for 12 years. You know, or people being in situationships for like 8 years long, in this kind of semi hope that the person would leave and leave their, you know, if it was an affair, their partner, or would commit.
Exactly. So it just depends on where they're at. But, you know, obviously if it's in the first intense stage where they think the person is the one and fantasy, and they haven't gone through the hurt at that point, and trying hard, then that is going to burn them the most, because they're not going to be able to understand, why did the person ghost them or leave them, or what did they do? And that will ruminate with them for months and months and months. They will not be able to let that go if they're in that stage, in that position.
Yeah. The next, I think this might be the last one. Though I could do this for hours actually. Boundaries. Yeah, it's really interesting. Boundaries. How do anxious people experience setting their own boundaries and receiving boundaries from a partner? Okay,
so I always said I had no idea what a boundary was. I remember getting to, you know, late teens or something like that, and I remember a friend saying, who was very secure, talking about boundaries, and I was like Googling what the hell that was, because in my home there was no boundaries. You could do whatever you wanted and your needs did not matter. So I think for a lot of anxious attachment style, they don't believe their needs do matter, and therefore they don't feel safe having boundaries. They feel that they're wrong to put themselves first. They're wrong to protect themselves. They feel guilty for it. I know I felt huge amounts of guilt. So that is very difficult. It's very difficult for them to say no. It's very difficult for them to set a boundary, you know. And this might be controversial, but actually I was thinking about this the other day. I actually think that anxious attachment style struggle with when other people have boundaries, because they don't have boundaries themselves. And so, you know, when avoidant partners or people that I experienced, or people that had really strong boundaries, it used to burn me. Like, it used to feel so personal, because I had given them everything. There was nothing left of me left. There was no boundaries I was putting in. So how dare they try and have boundaries against me? You know, it burned you. It felt personal. I mean, absolutely, that was wrong because actually it's very healthy to have boundaries. I'm a very boundaried person now, and it's healthy. You're just protecting yourself. It's okay. It's safe to have needs and it's safe to have boundaries. But I know that I really struggled with people giving me boundaries, and you know, I felt limited, and with me setting them, and that was because I didn't have them myself, you know. So they were triggering that abandonment in me. They felt like abandonment, that somebody didn't want me.
Yeah. And just to jump on what you said there about anxious people not being great at kind of respecting and adhering to other people's boundaries, it's something that I've seen a lot actually with clients I've worked with, where especially around no contact when a relationship ends, that's one of the most common places that I see where, you know, I'm saying, hey, so what did they say? What did they say about the end of the relationship? Did they say they didn't want to hear from you? And they're like, yes. But you've just texted them every day this week. Don't you understand that they set a clear boundary about what they wanted and didn't want, and you've just disregarded it? And they're like, I didn't realize. I just wanted to contact him. I'm like, oh, you're just acting. I usually go, you're just acting impulsively. You're thinking about what you want, and you're not thinking about what they've actually asked of you. And it's something that's really I've noticed in the last couple of years working with anxious people. So boundaries, avoidant person. Boundaries are, in many ways, it can appear like avoidant people are like the master of boundaries. Right? Because they're clear and they can be like, I don't want this, I don't want that. But boundaries for them are not a way in which they engage with people. It's a way that they protect themselves in ways that can actually be quite unhealthy. So instead of it being like, this is how I want to engage, it's like, this is how I keep you at a distance, you know? Don't call me unannounced. Oh, that's something that I used to say. Don't just call me. If you just call me, I'm not going to pick up the phone. That's not my style. You message me beforehand or whatever, I'm not going to pick up the phone. They can be very boundaried as people. They can set boundaries, but they don't know what they're doing. They don't know that they're like creating a sense of where I am and where the other person is and so forth. There's not like a consciousness to the boundary. It's just like, I need space and I have lines and I'm drawing them around me. And if you don't adhere to these, then I'm going to get really mad at you, but not tell you. I'm going to become resentful, but not tell you. I'm going to be frustrated with you, but not tell you. Or I'm going to do it in very passive aggressive ways. But then there's actually times where I noticed with clients and even myself where avoidance will completely disregard other people's boundaries because they just want what they want. And I think that's where a commonality is like when we become emotional as people, and we start to fixate on what we want and what we think is right, we ignore other people's boundaries. And obviously we can talk about that at like multiple levels, but on a relational level, a dating level, I see this very common in people. We become really fixated on like, I want this person, or I think we're right together, or I think we should have a conversation about this. Like conflict is a really good example where I've had clients who have said to their partners like, hey, I need a bit of space. I need a bit of space I need 10 minutes, 15 minutes just to process, and I'm going to come back. And then their anxious partners have just been like, no, you can't have that space. And then they feel you shouldn't be asking for space. And they're like, oh, then they start to question their kind of boundary making. Or, you know, an anxious partner comes and says, hey, we need to discuss this topic. And they're like, yeah. And then they kind of agree to it, and then they kind of sit there and they don't actually engage, which to some degree is ignoring the request that's there. It's not quite a boundary, but it's more of a request. So I think as human beings, especially as insecurely attached people, boundaries can be this thing that we really disregard when we become fixated on the thing that we want or we think is right.
Yeah, and when fear is activated, if we're really getting down to it, because, you know, space feels like an absolute threat to an anxious attachment style. It's their worst nightmare. So yes, it's perfectly healthy for a partner to want space. and need space, and it has nothing to do with the partner necessarily, but it will literally trigger their anxiety so bad that it makes it so impossible for them to respect that boundary. And, you know, I used to hate space. It used to be horrible for me. But now I love space. I think it's great. Give me time to regulate myself. I'm good. I like that. But it's just because that fear has been neutralized. But, you know, it's the same with the avoidant. It's when their fear is activated, then they will override boundaries, and that is the issue that makes the dynamics not healthy in the relationship, you know. And you know, it can coexist, you know. Secure people have boundaries, but they also have closeness, they also have space, they have all of those things in a beautiful balance. I also think sometimes, because an avoidant is trying to do it to protect themselves, and it will of course activate an anxious attachment style, sometimes it's the way that they might communicate it that makes it feel harder. You know, they're quite firm and they're quite with it, and they can be, you know, this is what I need, rather than sometimes what could really help is, you know, letting them know it's actually not personal, I've just got something going on and I'm just feeling a bit overwhelmed. But I know that is also hard for an avoidant to do, because then that's very vulnerable to even have to share that. Why would you need to? That's their intimacy and the vulnerability out the window too. So it is a double-edged sword. And I'm sure for you who's in a relationship, anxious and avoidant, then I'm sure these are probably the middle grounds that you might have had to have figured out to be able to coexist, I'm thinking.
Yeah. And I think the thing with the strong boundaries, the kind of cold boundaries, is it's coming often is what I've seen personally, and the people I've worked with, is there's a lot of overthinking before expressing the boundaries. So there's been thinking, like, I need to express this thing, because often boundaries are very interweave with needs. And from an avoidant person's point of view, especially men, they struggle with identifying their needs and then communicating them. Right? There's a real struggle to like know what I need and then communicate it. So what happens is there's been all this overthinking to like say it right. And actually, then they just remove all the feeling from it and the compassion for the other person. So it's delivered in this very like boardroom type of way, or like a decree, like this thing is happening, because of the fear of having any sort of pushback or negotiation would encroach upon their kind of individuality or their ability to actually uphold what they've said.
Yeah, and it's the exact same thing for an anxious person. They have the fear that their needs do not matter. And therefore, before they've set a boundary or communicated a need that they have thought about it 5 million times, spoken to their friends about it, checked that their need is okay to ask for, sometimes aren't really clear on what their need actually is. And then instead, it will spill out of them in an over-explaining mess, which could sometimes be a bit more demanding, can be a bit more, you know, emotional, which is just their way of doing it. But it's really coming from the fear that they don't believe their needs matter. It's the same thing underneath it. It's just coming out in a different way. And then it's creating that reaction in their relationships that then creates an argument, or creates, you know, it begins evidence of like, oh, my needs don't matter. Like, I've told them my need and they don't even care. And actually it's not. It's just the way that it's being communicated and the energy behind it that is creating that, is confirming that belief for them. The same with an avoidant.
Yeah. And then this interesting piece you say there about communicating it, because, you know, we talk about communication a lot when we come to relationships, and I think that communication is super useful and it is a really important stepping stone we need to go into, but we often over focus on the actual words that we say and forget about the delivery. And like, I can admit, like, that's the one thing that I have to work on sometimes when something feels really high stakes for me or really important. The delivery can be really hard to get right. Like, say it compassionately, thinking about the other person and so forth, can be a really difficult thing. And we don't think about the delivery enough of what we're saying. Like, how can we deliver it? One of my mentors used to say is like, how can you deliver this information to your partner in a way that they can digest, right? Like in a way that they can take what you said and go, oh yeah, okay, I can run that through me and listen to that, and then I can respond, instead of we giving it to them like it's a hot potato or it's like
Yeah.
a hot stone that they can't hold or digest at all.
Yeah, and because, there's emotion behind it and there's all of these fears wrapped around in saying it, that it's not as simple. And actually, if you were communicating it to somebody that you didn't have all those emotions for, or you didn't have that fear for, you probably would just be able to say it in a more neutral way. And you're not able to, when it comes to your partner, or when there's, resentment building up or feelings there of guilt or shame or all of those different things that will spill out when you're communicating.
Yeah. And we have different communication struggles, like avoidants struggle to get their words out. They struggle to, just to process what they want to say in the moment, especially in conflict. And it can seem like they don't care, but actually it's just they don't want to say the wrong thing and, feel rejection and feel like they've done something wrong. So they will clam up, not say anything, creates frustration and annoyance. And they're just struggling to say what they want to say, but also to kind of actually disconnect from some of the emotion they're feeling so that it doesn't come out as angry or frustrated. And then we have the somewhat opposite problem that occurs for the anxious people, where a lot of what's coming out is very emotional led, somewhat reactive sometimes, and lands on the avoidant often as criticism or attack. It's a very common thing I hear from people I work with.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is why a space to calm your nervous system and process it within yourself is so much healthier for everyone than having arguments, because in that argument, you are literally triggering each other. So it's only going to escalate more, And so taking that time to process, and then an anxious person doesn't need to over explain. I actually think an avoidant can be more precise in what they're trying to say when they've got time to process it. An anxious person can do it too, but when they're in that state, they're going to react and they're going to overspill and over explain everything, and that is just going to cause the pressure for the avoidant. And so actually, and then they shut down, and of course then that just makes the anxious person more anxious. So taking that time to figure out what is the need here, what do I want to say, and then saying it as simply as possible without the emotion is going to make for healthier communication. It's not always easy though, of course.
No, we are all human beings, and it is not always easy to do that. I was going to ask about how we start to shift these patterns, but I know well that we could never give it justice in the time that we have, right? Because we know how multi-layered it is to do that. So I guess a question that's percolating for me is inside of when people are kind of, actually, this is a good one. So I often have avoidant men particularly come to me and they are like, I want to do this work and I want to make my relationship better. But my partner, she is not interested. She's not interested. And I know this is the kind of opposite dynamic that is often presented. And, my partner, who I've mentioned before on the podcast, she works with women, and it's the opposite thing. They're with men who don't want to do the work. They're scared, they're nervous, whatever it may be. I am curious to hear from you, what can we do, or how can we be, that can entice or inspire, maybe inspire is a better word, our partners to start to do the work?
Well, I think we have to just focus on doing the work ourselves and lead by that example, and the partner will either rise or fall away from that. I've definitely been in those examples where I've, been the one trying to give the avoidant the links or telling them they're avoidant and, all of those things. And this is do the work and all this, all of these things. But actually what you're doing is just fixing, saving, chasing somebody else. And you're taking the focus away from yourself. So the best thing you can do is focus on yourself, focus on being the best version that you can be. And, what will come with that will come. You might outgrow the experience. You might outgrow that relationship, or that relationship might grow with you. You might inspire them that way. I don't think inspiring anyone by pulling them along, I don't think it works like that. And leadership doesn't work like that. And I think, you know, they're going to resist that because you're telling them there's something wrong. You can certainly ask them if they're, you know, willing to get coaching or therapy or something, work together. You can absolutely ask that question, but I don't think you can make anyone do anything. And I think that is the mistake that we try to do sometimes, because we're trying to get them to stop our anxiety, but actually it's us that have to stop that anxiety for us.
Really well said. Yeah, we want our anxiety to go away, and we've related our anxiety to them. So if they change, then we won't feel this way anymore, instead of looking at ourselves. Yes. Yeah. And I think it's a similar thing on the side with when I work with guys, is they're experiencing their partner's emotions as too much or volatile, or the relationship as too much. And they're like, well, if you can calm down, then I can relax and enjoy this relationship. When actually the work is to expand in emotional capacity, relational capacity, so that your partner they won't feel as triggered by you. You won't feel that they're too much. You'll just be like, okay, yeah, I've got capacity for life and this, and things will feel different for you. It doesn't necessarily mean, and I always caveat this, it doesn't necessarily mean that your relationship will work. You know, something that's coming up time and time again, I wonder if you see this, is where one person starts to do the work. Often I see this where as I work with men, is where their female partners have said, you need to go and do some work. So they contact me, we work together for 6 months. And then midway through there, they suddenly realize like, oh, I have all these needs now. Like there's some needs and wants I want from the relationship. There's stuff I want from this relationship that I didn't release. And they start asking for them, and their partner starts getting pissed off because they're like, what? I sent you to go and do this work so you'd make my life easier. Now you're asking me to do things that make me feel uncomfortable. Fuck you, go away. Which is something I see coming up time again.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, sometimes we can be attached to people that it's attached to parts of ourselves. And when we do some of this work, we don't need them to necessarily feel that within us now. So it does cause dynamics to change, or us to outgrow some of the dynamics. And, you know, just touching on what you said before is, you know, your partner is only triggering something that is inside of you already. It does not start with your partner. If you're feeling triggered, anxious or avoidant or whatever you're feeling in those moments, it's because it's already there. So I had to stop and be like, what do I believe about myself to be true for this to be triggering me? And when you look at it from that perspective and you start working from that perspective, that will start changing for you, because you're not, the partner is, you know, changing the partner is not it's going to happen again with the next partner. And that's what people find over and over again. The same patterns come out because it's subconscious. So the idea is not always to like get rid of somebody else. You can't outrun the work. And sometimes I even say anxious attachment style, they're avoidant themselves. They're just avoidant of themselves. That's what I always say, you know, they're avoiding doing the work themselves and they're putting it onto the avoidant as the issue. I understand why, because we think that that's the way, but I'm always keen to get people to look inwards instead, because that's when you can really create real change.
Amen. 100% agree with that. When we look at ourselves, we can change our lives much more powerfully than just trying to get everyone else to change around us. Candice, I think we'll wrap up there. It's been such a fascinating conversation. It's also gone very quickly. Really enjoyed to bounce these bits and pieces back and forth with you. I'm sure the listeners are wondering where they can follow you, where they can hear more from you, what sort of work you've got going on at the moment that they can join.
Yeah, so on Instagram, I'm at Candice Tamara _ actually on YouTube as well, and on TikTok. And I am at the Fuck Trauma podcast, so you will find me there. There's a lot of different ways to work with me. I have my signature program, Anxious, Secure in Love, which is my full method that has got incredible results, which you can do anytime for anyone experiencing anxious attachment style and that wants to move to secure relationships. But yeah, sort of certainly lots of ways.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for today. And listeners, thank you to yourselves today for listening. I feel like this is one of those episodes that I'd recommend that you don't send to your partner. Don't send it to your partner and say, this is what's going on. Listen to it with your partner and don't blame them, and ask them about how they're feeling. Because this is one of those episodes where we've gone on both sides. So you could sit down with your partner and they might express a bit more about how they're feeling, because they're feeling validated by hearing me explain it, because, you know, and use this as a way to create understanding, not to attack or to make yourself right. Rightness is the enemy of being relational. So use this as you will, or maybe there's a friend that, you know, this could be useful for.
Yeah, I love that. Actually, I just have one question for you. What is one thing you would tell, just one thing, there's so many different things, but if there's just one thing you could tell an avoidant or your younger self or whatever it was that was feeling avoidant, what is one thing that you think would change them if they were in a relationship right now, or change their relationship outcomes?
The thing that comes to me first would be empathy, but I wouldn't have understood it as empathy at the time. So I would have said, can you step into their experience and listen to their experience, not to critique, but to understand? And I think that would have made a big change for me at that time. It later did in my life, but that would be the gateway.
I love that. I love that. For me, if I was an anxious person, I think the thing that would have changed everything for me when I was in a relationship with an avoidant is nervous system regulation, because I was so anxious that it meant that I couldn't hear anything they were saying. I couldn't relate to them, which is why it's so good this podcast has allowed us to show those different sides. And it's wonderful hearing that, because I can totally see that. But in those moments, you can't see it because the anxiety is so strong. So if there's one thing I feel like I wish I could have done back then or known about, it is some form of regulation that would have made it easier for me to, have that relationship and even being a better partner in that relationship.
Yeah. So powerful to start to learn the myriad of ways to regulate our nervous system, not just for our relationship, but also our life in general. Thank you for adding that, Candice. Thank you very much again. And yeah, thank you, listeners. And I'll say ciao, ciao.